On the western edges of the River Severn, in the furthest reaches of the county of Gloucestershire, is a little-known Roman temple site just above the town of Littledean. It's known as Littledean Roman Temple or Dean Hall Roman Temple. It is within the old manorial complex. It is based on the hill, which has the most amazing and commanding view of the oxbow of the River Severn, and would have given the most amazing view of the tidal event that is the Severn Bore. This is that view taken only 2 weeks ago. This is a little higher in terms of elevation than what you would have actually have seen from where you are at the temple. Unfortunately, I had a modern hedge to contend with, hence it is at that height. It is not uncommon for perceived special points in the landscape, especially those with excellent vantage points or those connected to natural, geological, or in this case, tidal phenomenon, to be visited and become focuses of activity by prehistoric groups, and this site is no exception. The site itself appears to be a focus of activity for thousands of years. Not only do we think that this is due to the view over the Severn and the amazing Severn Bore, but also due to the fact the site also has a spring head, which again we know spring heads tend to be focuses of activity. And the spring head remains an integral part of this site. The earliest activity we have recorded is a very late Mesolithic, if not very early Neolithic flint scatter. But the more tangible kind of permanent activity we have actually starts with the Middle Bronze Age cremation cemetery. Activity in the Iron Age appears to consist of some formalisation of what had previously been natural wet areas into a more formalised central pool, around which a circular timber enclosure, I'll just highlight this there on the Jones and Maud excavation plot just there. This timber enclosure was placed around this pool. We don't know if it's a roundhouse type structure or whether it's more like a wattle kind of screen. And at this point, we also have a large boundary ditch around a general large area, which you can't see on this particular drawing, which is again very typical of late Iron Age temple construction. You'll see similar kind of boundary ditches at like Hailing Island, etc. They're not new. Now, the site was then massively more formalised into a more typical Roman-looking nymphaeum, which formalised the central pool, which became a focus of activity. Like many temples, there were various periods of redevelopment. In fact, quite frankly, I don't think redevelopment stops at this site. Some of these are relatively well dated with some pottery and some coin finds, others are less so. And unfortunately, we have absolutely no animal bone from the site whatsoever. The soil is just too acidic. Due to the focus on the spring and the unique location above the River Severn, this led Anne Ross in the 1980s to suggest that the temple was probably a cult shrine to the river goddess Sabrina, whom it is claimed the River Severn is named after. Here is the temple site today. An apple orchard was put in over the site at some point, I think during the 50s, hence there's a lot of trees and generally quite a bit of wild growth. Now, the first stone head found in this site was not actually from the temple itself. It was a complete fluke of a find from actually just over the wall, just over this area, into when they were landscaping the walled garden of the manor house in the very early 1980s. And then excavations on the temple itself started in the mid 1980s with Professor Jones from Barry Jones of the University of Manchester. 2 stone heads were discovered at this point, one of which unfortunately was not recognised for many years because it was missed by a spade's width and was actually in a soil sample bag and remained there for about a decade. Work began again in 2016 with the local landowner and a group of local community archaeology volunteers, which also included retired commercial archaeologists. And over the years, the site has been visited and advised, and advice has been sought from archaeologists from several universities. And since 2016, the finds of stone heads have continued to grow. We now have over 100 confirmed stone heads from this site. And we believe it is the largest collection of stone heads excavated from a single site within the UK. How the heads were deposited, this is for our contextual analysis, but we do know that some heads, like head 33, were deposited in groups. The method of the depiction of the heads varies enormously. We have those depicted more in the round, such as head 11 here, where the ear is clearly on the far edge. There's also a little bit of hairstyle remaining. Unfortunately, the damage over the rest of the head means we can't identify the hairstyle particularly well on this example. But it suggests that stone heads like this were not necessarily meant to be seen from one perspective, but potentially were meant to be seen in the round or even potentially handled and turned. This is very different to head 33 in the middle there, which is on, like others, a very even slab of stone, and which has no evidence of being seen at any other angle other than being seen as face on. And it has been suggested that these particular flat slabs of stone heads were potentially put into the walls of the temple. It's a theory, we can't prove it. We then have some very small, beautifully rendered, if now damaged examples like head 17. And just to help you pick out the features here, the eye is here. Unfortunately, it's largely gone on the left-hand side. We actually have a fantastic moustache round here. The nose is here, and this is indicative of a type of stone head we have on this site where an angle of the stone has been used to form the nasal bridge. Okay, the natural shape of the stone has helped, therefore, form the human head. And we have other little features. So you'll notice the hole here. This is a beautifully, neatly drilled hole into the mouth of head 17. And part of our investigations are going to be asking how and why. We also have fragments of stone, some of which contain just an eye, such as the front of head 19 here. I've got a couple of bits that just contain noses, engraved triangular noses. I have some bits of stone that, if I can identify what they are, will be a slight miracle, but we will look, we will investigate. We also have some stones that suggest they may have had multiple carvings or potentially multiple lives. We may have stone recycling. And that is very much the case here with head 19. We have the eye on the front. We may have another carving coming in here. Unfortunately, the stone is very water-worn, so the details have been lost. But on the incredibly flat and even reverse, we have this, for want of a better word, kind of sunburst pattern with very specific individual staccato dots surrounded by slightly longer strikes. And then we have heads like head 55, which strictly may not be a production of a human head or an intended production of a human head at all. Alternatively, we might have two faces that are overlapping. We may have a set of eyes here with a nose bridge, interrupted by a set of eyes here with a nose bridge and sort of mouth. And this is where techniques such as reflectance transformation imaging, RTI, as well as microscopic analysis of some of these heads will help us understand the progression of the work and the stones better. We also have a variety of geologies and a large variety of expressions, styles, and features. Some of these, like head 12 or head 36, can fit reasonably well stylistically into a general Romano-British date of some description, even though we can't be specific on style alone. Other heads, however, like head 92, don't have a scrap of diagnostic evidence about them. And this just kind of shows you the huge variety of material that we're dealing with and how this is going to be very fun, but very labor intensive as a project. But interestingly, what we don't have are heads that express or display much more typical Roman classical execution of form, whether that be in the Romano-British localized sense, like the Bon Marché stone head from Gloucestershire, where you've got clearly stylized elements from La Tène art, which are somewhat natrified. And what we certainly don't have evidence of are true Roman classical figures in stone, like the female bust here. This was from Stoke Mandeville. This was part of the HS2, one of the big finds from HS2. But we do have two heads, which are definitely, absolutely diagnostic of another art style, and that is La Tène art specifically. Head 32 on the right. This is a very typical, normally male La Tène art male depiction. I can't yet speak for stone depictions, but this typical slicked backed hair depiction, like you see on the Marlborough bucket, like you see on this mask and fibble copy type brooch, is the equal most common form of La Tène human we see in England and Wales in metalwork, certainly. It's also quite favoured on late Gallo-Belgic coinage as well, interestingly. Now, interestingly, the mask and fibble type brooch is quite important here. This is a mask and fibble, a copy of a mask and fibble type, localised in the UK. I know people are waiting for me to write this up. The writing up is on its way. This was found in Gloucestershire last year, the same county, actually not very far away from this site. And It dates roughly to 450 BC to 400 BC, and it tells us that by the time that this depiction is being made in the temple, at this point we're roughly dating this probably the 1st century AD. This imagery and this style of imagery and this style of human in Gloucestershire is already 300 to 400 years old. But the next head is way more intriguing. And you may think, as a fragment, how much can we tell about this? Well, the way the hair follows the form of the head is incredibly diagnostic, and only diagnostic of one other La Tène form, and that is that of the bobbed hair female. The nearest parallel to this is again the Marlborough bucket. You've heard a lot about the Marlborough bucket this morning, and I've just included here the illustration from the Rinkeby cauldron, which is 1st century BC Denmark, so you can see what these would have looked like when complete. Probably very much without the talk. We have no evidence of dress accessories on the Marlborough bucket, neither do we have evidence of dress accessories currently on our analysis of the stonework from the temple. But it is also interesting to point out that the use of the bobbed hair female form in the UK is incredibly restricted and specific geographically. Though we have one example in metalwork in Lincolnshire, which is fine because we have a bit of everything in Lincolnshire, it's explainable. Most depictions of this female form, in fact the rest of them entirely, actually come from the neighbouring county of Wiltshire, including the Marlborough bucket. And there are a broader group of female and gender ambiguous forms, and they all tend to cluster in this southwestern region, very specifically both sides of the River Severn. Therefore, when we're looking at this stonework, we don't just have to think about it on a pan-European level. We can't just think about it in terms of La Tène artwork, Romano-British artwork, and classical artwork. We also have to think about this at regional and local levels as well. This is just a flavour of the work that is ahead of us. The aims of the project were developed by Professor Ian Armit and Dr. Colleen Morgan of the University of York, and we were very lucky, they were very lucky, sorry, to get Leverhulme Trust funding. The project will take place over 22 months. We have only just started. We started in September, so we're still very much in our infancy stages. And the project aims are to undertake stylistic, contextual, and geological analysis of the heads. We're also going to be looking at the use of pigments. There are 2 heads in particular which look like they may have been decorated with red ochre, and this will form part of our investigations. We're going to explore the significance of the heads within the context of Northwestern European and late Iron Age and Roman visual culture. It's very unusual to have so many stone heads from a single site in the UK. But when you look at temple sites such as Dehalatat over in Gaul, where you have a huge amount of not only stone heads but wood heads as well, it may be this temple fits into a wider pattern of behaviour. And finally, we are going to create a comprehensive and accessible textual, 2D and 3D visual records of the heads. This is all written into the project, it's all planned, it's all financed, and this will be hosted open access by the ADS, so everybody can revel in this amazing corpus of work. That is the introduction of the Cults of the Head project. Many thanks to the Leverhulme Trust for funding, obviously, and a massive thanks to Don Mesa Wright, the landowner, who has been an absolute gem to work with. He's been so generous with his time. If you want to find more updates about this project as we carry on, you can find us on formerly Twitter, X, at Cult of the Heads. Yes, the S is in the wrong place because Cults of the Head was taken. And you will soon also find us on Instagram as well. Thank you very much for your time.